Welcome to In Presence We Trust, a podcast about the art and heart of holding group transformational spaces. I'm Rachel Rickards, founder of the Field Facilitator Training. In Presence We Trust is a sanctuary for aspiring and experienced facilitators seeking to evolve their facilitation and embodied leadership. In each episode, I will be harvesting insights from leading edge facilitators doing transformational work in fields like relationships, embodiment, therapy, intimacy, and education. In this episode, I'm joined by a very special guest, Mr. Reid Mihalko. Reid is a well-known sex and relationship educator. He's been featured on Netflix and helps adults boost self-esteem and improve relationships through humor and comprehensive sexual health advice, which you can find more of on readaboutsex.com. Following the Me Too movement in 2018, Reid addressed allegations towards him and stepped back to undergo a year-long restorative justice process. He now directs others to resources on accountability. Reid's workshops and lectures have reached over 60,000 people globally, and he's appeared in media like Oprah's Own and Newsweek. He founded Sex Geek Summer Camp and Sex Geek School, supporting sex educators with business skills to expand their impact. In the conversation you're about to hear, Reid, known as the Sex Geek, and I discuss our close friendship and why it's crucial to lift up fellow facilitators rather than compete with them. Reid shares his journey into sex education and facilitation, driven by a desire to improve relationships and avoid the pitfalls of his parents' marriage. We talk about creating workshops that meet community needs, emphasizing the importance of a safe and open environment for learning about sexuality. Reid also discusses his experience with the restorative justice and stresses the need for facilitators to be accountable and responsive to power dynamics. We explore how peer support helps facilitators grow and learn, and we touch on the challenges of running a group facilitation business effectively. If you're ready to begin, join me in taking a deep breath.
I'm so excited, and I apologize in advance to the listeners and viewers who are like, they're just catching up. They haven't seen each other in a long time. This is really not about facilitation, or is it?
Ooh.
Because facilitators hanging out with facilitators is a thing that I think that's a need that's not getting met with a lot of facilitators, because we need like peer time. It's not just about networking, but it's about what happens when people have a shared experience and shared lenses of power and privilege, and how we can support each other, not just online, but like what happens when we, close the workshop and all the attendees and support staff go away and we just sit and stare at each other across the table. You just burnt out and fried because we ran a retreat, and like you need those people in your life, and you are one of those people for me. And even though we don't see each other a lot, you mean a lot to me, and I love your work, and thank you for having me on your podcast.
Oh, I love you so much. Yes, it is. I was just thinking, it is that like looking across the table and going, you get it. Like, oh, you get it.
Well, I mean, we're going to cover a lot of topics. We talked about this before, but like I stepped down. I'm just going to say it right now. I stepped down from teaching in 2018 during Me Too, and you and Booster were the first people to invite me once I had my accountability process wrapped up. You two were the first people to invite me to come teach again. And the retreat that we did, that you guys had me come into, like we had those moments just sitting across the table, drinking tea, being like, what the fuck?
Yeah. It's a very, very special relationship and connection and like peer intimate alliance. And it's part of the reason why I'm doing this podcast. It's part of the reason why I created the Field Facilitator Training, because I was like, there's so much competition amongst facilitators and events, and I just really wanted to break that down and go like us supporting one another and me caring about your event success and you caring about my event success only like uplifts all of us and the world
Mhm.
and does what we want to be happening in the world rather than being in this like that's my music or that's my process or I branded that and I don't want you to use that, like
Mhm.
this kind of what is like possessiveness is just killing us. And so I just wanted to come into this place of celebration and like, I love you and I want you to be successful. And I want to give you all my best tips and tricks. And I want them to totally uplift your events. And I want to go and be inspired by what you're doing in the world now. And just to like break down that separation and to come into more celebration and connection, really.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're allowed, like, don't run a cuddle party and call it a cuddle party if you're not
Yeah,
a certified facilitator, because
there is that.
that's intellectual property and a specific kind of event. So I do think there's like sharing skill sets and best practices, and also you have a right to create something and then have boundaries and agreements around how that thing gets shared. And also, like, I'm known for a lot of vagus nerve, deep breathing stuff. None of that I fucking invented. Like, I got things from Sherry Winston, I got things from Nina Hartley, I got things from Joseph Kramer. Like, there's all these things that then I cobble together and I teach in a particular way, and people can copy or borrow that uh the module, like how I teach it, because it works really well for people, for
Oh,
facilitators. But at the same time, I'm like, you can say like I got this from Reid Mihalko, but don't say Reid Mihalko invented deep breathing, because that's bullshit. And and then there are lots of people who get erased for all their hard work,
yeah.
and cultures that get erased for all their hard work around appropriation and things like that. So it's like how do you honor your teachers and the shoulders that you stand up upon? And then if you're a nerd or a geek, how do you actually do your homework so that you can point to where things came from?
Mm,
Because you're helping your students and also other teachers learn the history of things
mm.
and the herstory of things, and that can be really important. and
Yes.
and some people learn better when you can anchor things and send them home and they can Google where things came from, and that just continues to reinforce, versus I created everything, I
Yeah.
invented the word sovereignty, like all that. I'm just like, that's me.
Thank you. Thank you. Soapbox welcomed. Yes, don't just rip off and steal people's intellectual property without appropriately cutting them. And yeah, like share about the teachers whose shoulders you stand on. And like what I want is what my biggest mission is right now is just for us to come into more collaboration and celebration and support and building each other up rather than
Yeah.
knocking each other down, you know?
And the ability as facilitators and as creators and helpers, like facilitators being to make facile, to make things easier for people. um some of that is about like where do you position yourself in how you look at the conversation. So like, I know with you and with David Cates, like belly to belly, how would you feel if people were teaching belly to belly trainings and not calling it that, and it was just a ripoff of your stuff, and they came to your training, and now like what would
Totally.
that feel like?
Yeah. Yeah,
And
it's
how is that impacting the field?
yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm in agreement with you, and I'm becoming a cranky old man who has thoughts and feelings.
I wanna know this cranky old man.
Oh, oh, get ready. Okay, so now I feel like we're just babbling. What do you want to talk about, Rachel?
Yeah, what do we want to talk about? Well, first, for people who don't know you, like I would just love maybe we can just start with like what I'm most interested in right now. And I actually feel like I don't even know this about you. How did you even what was that thing that happened in you where you went, right, I'm going to start teaching workshops about sexuality or about
Mm.
like sexual education? Like what was that moment or that light bulb went off where you were doing something in your life and then this thing started and you were like, yeah, I want to be in front of the room and I want to teach people about sexual pleasure and empowerment. How did that happen?
Yeah. Well, there's like the long journey to it, and then there's the actual catalyst event. So the quick version of all this is my mom and dad loved each other very, very much. They shared that special hug 4 times, and me and my 3 siblings grew up with parents that we would catch making out in the kitchen, and everyone cuddled on the couch or on my mom and dad's big waterbed because that was the biggest television in the house, and we all watched, $6 Million Man together, like as a family. And my mom and dad were always in the middle, and we were kind of like piled up on top of them. But my mom and they didn't inherit great communication tools. And so their marriage, like the waterbed, them in the middle, over the years, they were further and further apart, and all the kids were in the middle because they didn't know how to talk about or work through any of their relationship frictions. And then all of that just kept building up like a little paper cut scars over and over and over the years. And was a lot of slamming doors and yelling and this kind of stuff. And eventually my mom would self-medicate with alcohol. She became an alcoholic. And my dad was that generation of man where it's like, the woman I love isn't happy. It must be because we don't have enough money. And so he became a workaholic. And they stayed together till my mom passed away first. But at the very end of their marriage, the last like 5-10 years, things were actually quite nice. And they stopped fighting only because they were so exhausted from fighting for all these years that they kind of gave up. And I don't recommend exhaustion as a form of surrender to improve your relationships. Where that kind of impacted me is I had examples of 2 people who were madly in love, who were still in love, but ended up really fucking mad. And so like I knew that it wasn't enough to just be in love with somebody and to be committed and not want to break up. And so like unintentionally, I started looking for what were the things that they were missing that I needed so that I could have a healthier relationship. I would then go to college, start falling in love and learning how to be promiscuous. I became a bartender and an actor in New York City. More promiscuity, still trying to wrestle with being monogamous or sowing your oats, being a New York bartender. And eventually, like, because of being a bartender, everyone like, hey, are you getting any? How's dating? What's your love life like? Like I could ask people that and it wasn't creepy because you're the bartender and you're supposed to talk about all these things. And people would share with me. And what was happening was unintentionally, I was gathering all this information about what's working, what's not working, what is it like out in the world. And New York City had people from all over the planet there. So I got to talk to people from all these different cultures about sex and relationships. Where the catalyst point for me becoming a teacher is I was on a soap opera, Guiding Light. I had a role being a massage therapist. I was on another soap opera as the evil male nurse. And the producers, who were all women of Guiding Light, surrounded me one day on set, and I think I'm getting fired. And they're like, we need to talk to you. And I'm like, what's going on? And they're like, we think you should charge money for your dating advice. And I'm like, what? And they're like, your name came up in the production meeting today, and we all realize we've all come to you for dating advice, and your advice is better than our therapist's advice because we all have therapists. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, are you firing me? They're like, no. I'm like, is this about my acting? And they're like, you could be a better actor. That is totally true. But like, your relationship take is pretty unique. And then a couple of years later, I would create a workshop called Malekind 2.0. It was to teach men how to understand women. No one signed up for this workshop because men didn't give a flying fuck then. This was all in the 90s, by the way. And my second workshop, which I created a few months later, was Cuddle Party. And so Cuddle Party turned into this international news story because New Yorkers were paying money to cuddle, and it was this feel-good pun intended, feel good news story. And that launched my career being a spokesperson for cuddling and, teaching and facilitating. And that, a couple of years later, we started training facilitators. So and then this was all where me being a geek, I used to be a martial arts instructor, doing film production, all this stuff was oh, wait, all this stuff makes sense. And then also underneath all that, I was throwing orgies for my friends because I needed to explore my sexuality. So all this kind of rolled into this, ball of whatever. And now 20 years later, because Cuddle Party just turned 20.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you. I don't know how many thousands, tens of thousands of hours I've run events and designed events. And what is so interesting to me is how do you create safe space or safer space, braver space for people in cuddle party situations and some of my orgies, strangers who've never met? How do you help them learn consent and navigate connection and intimacy so that they can start to unlock and explore the things that are important to them and for them to discover who they are? And then that's end of sermon.
Amazing. Thank you for that. I'm remembering now, I have known pieces of that journey, but it feels good to have heard you share it all again. Let's pick up right there, which is, what are the essential nuggets and pieces maybe now, because I imagine 20 years ago the way that you were running Cuddle Party versus how you would run a Cuddle Party today is vastly different. And I'm curious, just speaking from today, and maybe we can also look back on, where did you start with those essential pieces of what's really important to create safety for Cuddle Party and where you're at now?
So the way I would run Cuddle Party is almost exactly the same. And
As
this
years
is
ago, really?
yeah. This is a whole so this is the problem. This is where I need to check myself. So if we the welcome circle format, how do you get a bunch of strangers to feel safe and navigate consent and explore whatever the topic is? Because cuddling, non-sexual touch and affection versus all out, nudity, sexual touch and affection, the parameters and how you onboard somebody into creating that context. And if you imagine you're always teaching people who've never been to a workshop before, just design wise, how you kind of set and calibrate all the knobs and whistles. When you think about what does somebody who's never been to a workshop need to know to then to explore a workshop, you can start, there's a basic format, I think, and I've been using it for 20 years. And then all the people who run cuddle parties, who've been certified to run cuddle parties, all the people who run cuddle parties, and they're just ripoffs, but use the format, the welcome circle format, all the people who are throwing orgies, because it's the same welcome circle format, almost identically, because how you get people to connect, how you break the ice, how you get them to feel safe, and how you get them to practice and explore with each other, that's pretty standard and seems to be work really well on across cultures and different languages. There's always the big thing is when different cultures, it might be a little bit, you have to turn the dials in different ways, but mostly this works because now, however many thousands of orgies and cuddle parties that have happened based on this format, it seems to be working really, really well. So I wouldn't change anything. The problem is I'm so stubborn that it works that I worry I'm not open-minded enough to consider, doing it differently. And then when a certain organization or facilitator fucks something up because they didn't use the format, I'm like, aha, I was right. And so there's a lot of confirmation bias woven through all of this after 20 years. And I still think it's a smart way to do things.
Yeah.
So that format, that welcome circle design, which, I teach, facilitators how to understand that, and how to design it and tinker it with themselves. Like, that shit I love, because this is the essence of facilitation. And a big part of that is something you do automatically and also that you teach, which is presence.
Mm.
And how to be present with somebody, but also still be listening to the room filled with people, because you're the bus driver of this magnificent, or the captain, the ship captain of this magnificent
I
ship.
like bus driver.
Yeah. So like you're that bus driver, and it's almost like you're a school bus driver. It's not even adults, because so many adults are wrestling with their childhood stuff, and then it's just turbocharged because it's sex and intimacy.
Thank you for that. I really commend you on, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like, this works. It's solid. It's time tested. It's proven. And we're just going to keep going with that. Like, that's, and it gives the brand a recognition and a foundation. And I think that also supports creating safety. If things are changing constantly, this is already something that pulls the rug underneath people, and there's okay, what's coming next? What do I expect here? And that already compromises the safety of the participants.
The world doesn't need more Reid Mihalkos. The world needs you, teachers. I'm talking to you being your authentic self. And some of us do need to take ourselves a little less seriously, because that gets, that whole guru thing is kind of fucked up too. So this stuff is just important to me, and I hope it's not so important to me that it gets weird for everyone watching and they're like, what the fuck? And hang out with other teachers, share kung fu, and take those best pieces, and then learn where you can weave those into what you're offering, so that you can help more people.
Yes. Amen. Thank you. It never is going to get weird to hear you share your passion and your enthusiasm to leave the world better than the one that you were introduced to. Like, my heart just opens, and I love you. And yeah, this is why I want the world to know you, because of this. You're an amazing, amazing man and facilitator.
Thank you.
I want to come back now and keep with the geeking out theme. You're a fun person for me to geek out with. And I'm really curious. You've created, you have, like, I don't know, a list of 20 amazing workshops that you've constructed and created, and that you just teach and lead. And I'm curious what your process is around creating workshops. Is it like there's something that you're so excited and you're kind of exploring for yourself, and in that exploration you figure out a way to guide people into it? Or is it that, like, people are coming to you and asking you, like, how do you do this? And then you go into service and create to teach? How is it that a workshop is created through you? Is it a personal process that becomes professionally delivered, or is it a professional process, or is it like just a mystery box every time?
Oh, good. I wish I could, like, Vulcan mind meld all the answers at once. So how teaching, and how also the business of teaching, how this works for me is a lot like sex. And so bear with me, everyone.
Yeah.
So, like, I might have something I really like doing, but if you don't like doing it and your body's not responding, it serves no one for me to try to force it, unless we've already negotiated a kinky kind of exchange where, the forcing is really a turn on for you and for me, and then whatever. So when people invite me to come teach to their communities or at their events, they're like, oh, well, like, what's coming through you? What's alive for you, Reid? Like, what do you want to teach? And I'm like, no. What does your community need? Like, as a community organizer or event creator, if I could deliver a thing that your community could learn and it would make your life easier as a facilitator, as a community organizer, as an event,
Producer.
creator,
Yes.
what's the thing? And the reason I'm asking that question is I have so many things I'm passionate about teaching, but if your community doesn't want to learn pegging, and then like I love show and tell and try sex education, so it's like I'm going to show you the thing, I'm going to tell you how to do it, and then you can try it. That could be completely the wrong workshop for your festival. So what am I doing? I'm not serving anyone. And so like for me, I'm also asking this question for event organizers and community organizers and teachers, because I would do the exact same thing to you, which I think we talked about that time when you brought me to Europe. Like, I'm like, what is your community struggling with? Like, what are your people struggling with? Because you are a focus group to help me understand what people are actually wrestling with. What's the thing that would like shift the community? Like, what's the difference that makes the difference? But like back to the sex part, if you and I were negotiating sex, I know what I like, but I'm really curious, like what turns you on? Like, I want to know what's the thing that would make your night if we're going to hook up at this play party or whatever. And I'm not asking the questions as a seduction technique. I'm asking because I'm legitimately curious and I want to find the fit where we can play and really like enjoy our connection. So as a teacher, once I figure out what I think a community needs, then it's like, well, do I have any workshops that already fit that bill? And then here's the workshop, right? And if it's not, then I'm like, oh, well, here's the challenge you're running into. Here's how I think I would solve it. And then the workshop kind of starts to reveal itself, because all I'm doing is I'm trying to solve a challenge or a problem or help people learn a thing to unlock this friction point for them. So we're talking about frameworks, right? Like the Embrace the Awkward pillow is about the Embrace the Awkward formula. readaboutsex.com/awkward. And that formula for me helped me solve a problem about when you're having a threesome, how do you start to have sex? Because it gets really awkward. But the Embrace the Awkward formula is useful in all these other situations. So can I teach you a thing? Can I teach you 3 things that will change the trajectory of your life around this friction point? And then can I teach you in such a way that you can go home and teach somebody else at least one of them? That informs everything about my workshop design. And then if I'm creating a welcome circle like Cuddle Party or welcome circle for an orgy, how am I going to break the ice and build the culture of this event in about 45 minutes to an hour and a half, knowing that the first 20 minutes when people arrive, some people are so filled with adrenaline and cortisol that I'm going to need 15 minutes to get them to start coming back down to baseline.
Yeah.
So like, I know that if I can get an audience feeling safe and laughing and learning, and we're moving through our shame and our anxiety, and then it's appropriate for me to drop trow, me talking and showing how to pleasure nutsacks while I'm talking and pulling my own nutsack around, I know that people go home and they're like, something shifted. Because I'm normalizing so many things. I'm normalizing it's okay to not know about nuts. And I'm just being normal and me and being like, this is why this is so important. Like, I have to show you because it'll make more sense, because many of us are visual learners, but we try to go to porn to watch how to be better lovers, and trying to learn how to be a better lover from watching porn is like trying to learn how to be a better driver from watching the Fast and the Furious. And that doesn't work. And then people are like, oh my God, I never thought about it like that. And so the design piece for me has less to do about what I feel like the audience needs and me really trying to listen to somebody else's audience through my conversation with that community leader. And if I can start figuring out what they're wrestling with, and I can create my offering for them, and then when I get in the room, if I can be present enough and also kind of push all of my I think I'm right all the time to the side, so I'm really trying to listen, then magic starts to happen. Because sometimes you do need to like pivot and be like, you know what, we're not going to do the pegging thing today. It just doesn't, this doesn't feel like where we are at. Or as a facilitator, you're like, something's in the room and I can't pin it. And I need to figure this out. And then you pull out of your facilitator bag, how do I want to try to solve this problem? Is it a 15-minute break? And I'm going to check in with my support team. Am I going to like get everybody to partner up into groups of 3 or 4 and then have a conversation about what they're feeling? Am I going to lead people through a group meditation and a body scan and then try to get them sharing? Like, I'm always trying to feel and ride that wave, just as if I'm having a threesome and I'm trying to listen to 2 bodies at once, and also not just throw my needs and wants and desires out the window. So this is where it all kind of feels very the same to me. And we're back to that, like that ability to be present and listen and to check your assumptions. And that's hard, but really good facilitators, because when you're working with people live, it's not a lecture.
Yeah, thank you. This is so beautiful. It is like, as in workshop, so in life. And I love the analogy of bringing it back to sex and the attunement that is required to stay in connection, both to your lover and to your audience. And I'm like, I want to geek out with you a little bit more on like that moment when you're facilitating and you're like, dude, it's totally not appropriate to do the flying squirrel right now. And I'm like, what are you tracking in that moment? Like, what's happening for you when you're like right at that choice point of like going in this direction or this direction? And what do you do then? Like, what is your internal process? And then how is it physically expressed?
Well, it's a little bit of a felt sense thing. And this is also like, I think for everybody, as you become and find your own way of being a facilitator, it's going to be different for everybody, right? Like, so for me, it's a felt sense, but it's also like a bunch of probably mirror neuron things and a whole bunch of like stuff that's just, it's implicit knowledge. It's not explicit, and you're tracking a bunch of stuff. So it's just a sense of something's off.
Yeah.
The room's not with me.
Yeah.
Right. And when you talk to performers, like comedians and things like that, they talk about like that feeling of like, I lost the room and I'm fucked. So there's like, it's for the people who are nerds around sex. It's like when you're trying, somebody wants you to make them squirt, make them. So now it's already goal oriented and that's fucked. But like, great, you want to squirt. And then you're kind of listening to people's bodies. And then you're like, maybe your body's in this place. And maybe it's somebody who's never squirted before, right? Where they've only squirted twice. And now the pressure's on. And like, you start doing the squirt move, but it just it's not right. Like their body's not there. You're sensing something and you just got to trust it rather than plow through. So the thing that I'm noticing is, because also the way that I teach is very kind of transparent, because I'm also modeling, I'm sending you home to your partner or to your other relationships or a future person you're going to fall in love with. So like, I'm trying to model best relationship skills in the moment with my audience while I'm teaching.
Nice.
Versus, you will not ask questions until I tell you it's time to speak, which is a little fucked up. But some teachers need, please hold your questions until we're done. But what they need to tell you is, because my nervous system can't handle interruption really well. when I'm teaching.
Yeah.
Whereas my nervous system, like, this is me in my natural state. So I'm like, please interrupt me while I'm teaching. But the reason I'm okay with that is, one, my nervous system is fine. Two, I want you to practice speaking up in the moment, because that's really fucking important during sex. To be like, hey, that's not working for me.
Nice.
So I need you to, and also as a teacher who has a lot of charisma, I need you to challenge my authority by interrupting me.
Right. As a facilitator, when is it appropriate to be sexual with your students? Like, are there ways that makes sense, and that a facilitator is in kind of ethical alignment with what it means to be a group facilitator today, and not taking advantage of power and privilege and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. So I will preface this by saying, in 2018, some people in my community came forward, like, sharing information of ways that I'd harmed them. And so I stepped down from teaching for a year. I had people in the restorative justice and transformative justice movements who were friends of mine. So I already knew about restorative justice. And I knew that if anyone had ever come forward and felt harmed, I was like, I knew restorative justice was the way that I wanted to respond. So I was lucky in that I was already familiar with it, because I, as a geek, was like, listen, and also everyone, if you haven't figured this out yet, like, I'm super slutty. So whatever you think counts as body count for, like, this person's slutty, I'm telling you, you have to throw at least another 0 on that.
Me too.
I play with a lot of people. And I'm an ex comic book nerd. I'm still a nerd about comic books, but I used to be a comic book artist before I was an actor and all the things. So, like, with great power comes great responsibility from Marvel Comics and Spider-Man. Like, that to me is like one of my like, core pieces of who I am. So it's like, with great power and privilege comes great responsibility. So I knew that with all the people I'd ever played with, I must have missed something somewhere. And I know enough about trauma, I know enough about power and fame, that even though I'm not Beyonce famous, but in my small pond, I'm a big fish, I knew that some people wouldn't feel comfortable speaking up. So, like, over the years, I'm like, somebody's got to be, I must have fucked something up. So how do I want to respond? And then restorative justice was that thing. So when my community came forward, I responded with a restorative justice process, and I was very, very lucky to have people that wanted to support that process, because it's nothing like, repair is not a one-person job. And there are still people in my community who don't think I should be teaching at all. So, and people can go to readaboutsexcom/read accountability, and that will lead people to the public blog and all this other information and resources. Where this all comes down to as teachers, and where I have seen, again, my personal opinions, teachers fuck this up, is, I don't think, this is me personally, if you want to sleep with students outside of a workshop container or a play party, I don't think you should do that unless you are willing to stop teaching for at least a year. Like, how much do you really care about people? And so for me, if I was fucking up something, it also meant, like, if I was missing something about consent or power and privilege in my life, then it definitely wouldn't be in my teaching. So it made sense for me to step down from teaching, to reevaluate everything I teach, and to work with support people who would help me figure out where was the dead spot or the blind spot. Like, where was I missing something? And that is a really hard thing to go through, which is why a lot of people don't go through it, but also a lot of people don't know about repair and restorative processes. So it's like, how would you know to respond appropriately if you weren't even aware of how to respond ever, kinds of things. So, like, culture makes this more complicated, but the getting back to teaching and then sleeping with students, it's just better to not. It's easier to not.
Mm-hmm.
And then the minute you start like playing socially, there's a lot there that needs to be tracked and, managed. So it gets really complicated really quickly.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't advise people to do it. But at the same time, humans are human.
Yeah.
And people with power and privilege are also still human. So like there's an interesting kind of like, if you are a small town doctor who's single and everybody in town is your patient, are you just never supposed to date anybody? You're never supposed to fall in love with anybody because you have power and privilege over everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and so like there's a social question and dynamic that also needs to be addressed, which is why I have opinions about play party facilitators who never play at their play parties, because I think if you're the only person brave enough in your small town to run a play party, do you never get to play at your play party because you have the power and the status? How does that help you as a human being?
Mm-hmm.
And why can't we focus on how do I steward my community to hold me accountable to not be pulling off creepy bullshit stuff so that I also can get to play and frolic? And then that is a conversation about how you share power, and how you navigate those complexities. So also like, because me throwing play parties started with me and my friends, and I needed orgies to discover who I was. And I didn't know who else was throwing orgies. So a lot of my early orgy days, it was me and my friends fucking.
Mm.
And then like, how do you clean up all the messes? And how do you show up? And how do you really care about people? And then it's a deeper conversation about community design as a teacher and as a leader.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I'll say on this is where in the tantra world, where I did a lot of work, where it got really fucked up is watching teachers who were it was really just getting laid for them, and there wasn't a lot of care. And so people like dating your students, that was very messy. And like having the students, the fresh meat, like using your workshop as your hunting ground.
Right.
Like that was where things were really unclean and fucked up. And then there's just a lot of spiritual bypassing around, like, why are you stuck in victim triangle? And if you did more shadow work, then you would be above all this. And that's why I can go on rants about concepts of like sovereignty and attunement and how these things get weaponized.
Yeah.
Versus like, take some fucking responsibility. Like,
Yeah.
you feel harmed by our engagement. Let me pause everything. And I want you to tell me more. And then I want to figure out how I can do better. Said most never any guru white tantra dude I knew. So, and that's, again, I'm trying really hard not to rant.
Thank you. No, it's so good. It's good and it's juicy and it feels like truth and refreshing and honest. So
Yeah.
thank you. I think what I take away from what you're sharing is also the importance of having accountability peers and people who are just like people who are my peers who I'm able to share and talk about and dialogue with and be like, what do you think of this? And to just like have some other influences that are reflecting me back to me. So I'm not living in an isolated bubble of my own power and privilege.
Mhm.
And, in that. And it got me curious actually listening to you, because I was like, wow, the accountability process that you went through around this, there's a version of that that all facilitators could go through, where we get to like confront our shadow or our blind spots and the things that we're not seeing that are unconsciously impacting the way that we show up and hold space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and hopefully, what we're doing as communities and peers is helping each other make the unconscious conscious, which doesn't mean you're gonna like the answer. And so, like, and also just what's problematic about me talking about accountability is what would be really great is at some point having somebody on your show, or maybe it's you, Rachel, talking about what it's like being a teacher and wanting other people to be accountable. Right? There's that, like, because I'm not a survivor. I don't identify as a survivor in the ways where, like me being called out and responding with restorative justice, and me talking about my views on accountability, like this centers me.
Yeah.
And really what we need to be encouraging is centering survivors and hearing their stories. And so teachers who feel fucked over and asking somebody else to be accountable, like we need those words and those voices too, right? So it can never just be me talking about accountability, because that gets really fucked up. And then, I'm trying to not control a narrative. I can share why I chose things the way that I did, and ultimately share some of my ideas of what I think my community needed. Because ultimately, like when other, it's usually men, come and ask me about accountability, I'm like, listen, I'm not an expert on this. There are restorative justice experts. You need to go talk to them. And at some point, your community wants to know, how is the world safer with you back? How is my community safer with you back teaching?
How
And
is it?
if you can't answer that question, how is somebody who hears a rumor supposed to feel safe?
Yeah.
Or safer?
Yeah.
Right? So the reason I have a little pamphlet when I teach for people to take home is, one, I want people to know about restorative justice and transformative justice. Two, what my support team and the survivor support team did is we tried to create a paper trail of receipts of the work that got done during my process that would hopefully help people understand or feel that, okay, so the community might be safer with Reid back. The problem I see is you're sending all these people home with the message that if you have more power than somebody else, you can never engage with them. And that's just not life. What we should be doing is how do we navigate having power and privilege, and how do we show up for each other to repair, and how do we keep learning how to do things better? And I will end on this point, because I always get weird if we're talking about accountability too long. Whenever we learn how to do something better, like I didn't understand power and privilege in quite the ways that I do now. When you learn and upgrade, it means all the years before that, you could have been doing better. You could have done it differently, but you didn't have the tool or the awareness, right?
Yeah.
You missed a bunch of shit.
Yeah.
Are you willing to take responsibility for the past? That's a question I think every facilitator needs to ask themselves. For me, my answer is yes. This is a very complex situation. And I don't know that my knee-jerk response is the right one, but it is congruent to my values.
Yeah. Thank you. I have a question. I know you wanted to close that, but I have one more question just to kind of bring it in, which is could be just one thing or a couple things that is like qualitatively different about who you are as a facilitator, how you facilitate since your restorative justice process? Like what is 1 to 3 things that you do differently now that you didn't do before that process?
I go a lot slower with interactions.
Mm.
And I try to do more due diligence and checking in with people about how power and privilege occurs to them.
Mm.
And you know, so like Angel Adioha is one of my support people for my process. It's like, it is never a bad idea to pump the brakes. It is never a bad idea to slow things down. And, often, and this is just in general, and at play parties, whether you're a teacher or not, like, maybe, like, don't change your agreements in the middle of playing, right? If you guys negotiate oral sex and then somebody wants to fuck, maybe don't.
Yeah.
Right? Folks, Google empathy gap, nerd out on empathy gap. That's why you don't want to change things in the middle of things. People get hot and heavy, and then everything gets weird. Like, you're like, oh, I would never eat ass, and then you're hot and horny, and you're like eating ass. Like, you're like, what? Welcome to being human. But like, as a teacher, you just need to be better at this.
Yeah.
You're the bus driver. You need to be a better driver always. And so slowing things down, pumping the brakes is almost always the right thing to do, because, if you are meant to be together, if this student is your soulmate, eye roll for people not watching the video, they'll be your soulmate 3 months from now.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool your jets.
Yeah.
Slow down.
Yeah.
You're especially when you're in a container, you're in a heightened state.
Mm-hmm.
They are too. And you are too.
Mm-hmm.
But mostly I would say I would slow down. What has changed for me is I'm a lot more articulate about power and privilege, and also asking better questions, and then having more reasons to say no to somebody.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm. Mm.
Yeah. And then it's just like crushing on somebody when you're a teacher. When you're the teacher and you're crushing on somebody, do you know when you're doing that? And can you fucking back the fuck off?
Yeah.
And give that person their space to be a student without you muddying the waters. And also the goal is to never stop being human, but you got to try to be the best human you can be.
Yeah. Thank you. This is a very rich conversation, and I really appreciate you, Reid, for your care and for the amount and the hours that you have invested into exploring this topic, and like how you could take 110% responsibility and think of everyone involved, and like it's beautiful. And I know you don't want to be like praised and worshipped for this, but what you're role modeling right now is really important, especially for facilitators and people in these positions of power, and I just want to say thank you.
You're welcome. I will point people to the Bonobo Network. Is a community that is near and dear to me, and they have a really great consent and accountability kind of design for their community. And I would encourage people to go to bonobonetwork.com/accountability. I think we'll bring you to the right page. Yeah. And because part of also for facilitators who are also weaving community, you're also teaching your community how to call bullshit on you.
Yeah.
And hold you accountable, which is the smartest thing you can do, and it is the least fun thing to train your community to call bullshit on you. But if you have your shit together, it's actually quite fun, because then you're like, if they call bullshit on me sooner, shit is less fucked up.
Yeah.
Most communities only call out their leadership once things are just so fucked. And what you want is you want everybody giving you feedback.
Yeah.
And so when somebody comes and complains or offers, something challenging, I would encourage any facilitator to practice rewiring their knee-jerk response to be to upgrade it to, thank you so much for coming and telling me, tell me more.
Yeah.
And if we can get our communities to, by default, start weaving in repair and how to support each other through that, and normalizing that we're never going to get everything right. Like, harm is going to happen, and not use like harm is going to happen as a way of spiritually bypassing anything, but being like, no, like, we need to be prepared and we need to practice this preparation.
Yeah.
I think that would be really useful for all of us as facilitators.
Yes. Thank you. Amen. Amen to more conflict resolution and repair processes, and looking at ourselves and confronting our shadows and getting feedback on where our blind spots are and continuing to do the work. I think most people who are facilitators, I mean, maybe I shouldn't even make a statement like that.
Most?
I would hope. I mean, I know I'm here because I want all that for myself. Like, part of being a facilitator is like, my profession means I am never ending growth and transformation journey for myself. And that's an assumption just based off of why I do this and what excites me about it.
I just want to say thank you to everybody. If you're still listening to this, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Rachel, I appreciate you just getting to talk to you. And as the conversation was, like, I hope maybe it's role modeling also for the people watching and listening. Like, do you have community that you can have this kind of brain sex with and this kind of heart connection with, and also not be afraid to say, hey, that piece, that doesn't feel right. And can you build peer community with that kind of trust, so that you're not just surrounding yourself with a bunch of yes people, and apprentices who want to, work their way up the ladder. Like, I hope this was helpful, is really what I'm trying to say.
Yes, it's super helpful and super, super beautiful and super well spoken and well thought through. And yeah, I hope anyone listening takes a lot away from this and also reflects back, like, what pieces we're missing, or where else would you like us to riff off of, or what can be fed back or reflected back from this conversation. I'd be really open to receiving that and continuing. Yeah. So thank you, Reid. I love you, Reid.
I love you too. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here with me. I hope everyone watching and listening has enjoyed as much as I have. And this will be a to be continued, because I think we have more fun things to talk about.
Yay!
Thank you so much for joining this episode of In Presence We Trust. Join us next week for another exciting new special guest and interview on this facilitation podcast. Until then, you can check out my website, thefield.com, for information on upcoming courses with myself, and also check out previously recorded episodes and special guest interviews. Special thank you to all the beings who've contributed to the creation of this podcast: Michelle, Vaishnavi, Joby, Lavinia, and the sound fields, Thomas and John. Thank you again for joining as we continue the journey and open up this new communal space and learning environment that is In Presence We Trust. You can subscribe or follow wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching on YouTube, please feel free to like and comment below. Until next time, deep breath.